From chapters 1 to 7, we have come to understand that this is the formula for capitalism. You have some value which is in money, in the money form. With it you buy a commodity. Those commodities include two kinds of commodities, the means of production on the one hand and labor power on the other hand. Then you set it to work, the process of production, captured by the symbol P over here. After the process of production has taken place, you end up with a new commodity. The raw materials have been turned into a commodity that can be sold on the market. Since you hired labor power to convert that commodity into something new, convert the raw materials into a new commodity, this new commodity now has labor added into it. It has more labor than the raw materials that you purchased, and hence you are able to sell it for more than the money that you first gave into that commodity. Where does the difference between M and M prime come from? Where does the surplus value come from? Surplus value, therefore, is the difference between the labor you got from the laborer and the labor power, the money, the wage that you gave to the laborer. The difference between the two things is the origin of surplus value. Surplus value can take different forms. It can take the form of profit, it can take the form of rent, and it can take the form of interest. It takes three different forms. But whatever form it takes, its basis is always the unpaid labor of the laborer, because the laborer is paid only labor power, whereas what you receive from the laborer is labor. So in this exchange, you end up with more labor than you actually paid for. There is an unpaid labor that the worker has actually given you. And for this reason, Marx concludes that the capitalist system is exploitative of all those people who are in the relationship of employees. Doesn't matter what kind of employee you are. Doesn't matter that you're working at a desk, or you're working in a factory, or you're working with your hand, or you're working with your mind. Whatever kind of laborer you are is irrelevant. The point is that you are all transferring a bit of your labor to the capitalist, and what you're being paid for is your labor power. That is the essential difference. So value produced by the laborer ends up with the capitalist owing to the monopoly on the means of production. The basis of this whole system is the monopoly on the means of production. When the capitalists don't have that, they can't have capitalism. Capitalist system can only be created when the 1% basically come to control the means of production. Now here, Marx draws a distinction between what he calls constant capital and what he calls variable capital. It's not complicated at all. The money that the capitalist spends on the means of production, whether that is raw materials or whether that is machinery, tools, and other things, all of that is basically called constant capital. And the money that the capitalist spends on buying labor power, on employing people, is all called variable capital. Why is the money spent on buying labor power called variable capital? Because that is the part of capital in which labor accumulates. Because that is the part of capital in which you have received labor and paid for labor power, and you are getting surplus value. So it is really variable capital, that generates surplus value. What about the money that I spent on the means of production, on tools, on raw materials? That transfers its value as a constant into the final product. It does not, its value does not go up. It is not change. It is constant. It does not vary. The part that varies is the part that I spend on buying labor power. From here, we can also understand the formula for the rate of profit. So the rate of profit would be the profit you earn, which is surplus value over here, divided by the total capital. Naturally, that's the rate of profit. Of course, the total capital can be divided into two parts: the money that I spent on buying the means of production, which is C, and the money that I spent on buying labor power, which is V. So the formula that Marx comes up is that the rate of profit is S, that's your surplus value, just your profit, divided by capital, which can be divided into two parts, C plus V. S is just the surplus value, what extra money is earned. what extra value has come to the capitalist. It is M prime minus M, the value that has been added. Okay, the more money that has been made. The money that was advanced, if I subtract that from the money that I got back, I get what? S. This is the profit I made. Okay, but he's not using the term profit, he's using the term surplus value, because profit just goes to the capitalist, to what we call the industrial capitalist, whereas surplus value also includes rent. Surplus value also includes interest. So he's also looking at that as part of the exploited money from the laborers. Okay, so the formula is S over C plus V. C plus V is quite simply, very simply, constant capital and variable capital, the money I spent on buying raw materials and tools, and the money I spent on buying labor power. Now we can also calculate the formula for the rate of surplus value. In other words, this is also the formula for the rate of exploitation. S over V, forget about C, just S over V tells us the proportion of total wealth that goes to the capitalist, that would be S, in relation to the social wealth that goes to the labor class, that would be V. All of S in society divided by all of V would tell you what portion of the total wealth of society is going to go to the capitalist versus what portion is going to go to the laborer. Why is C excluded from here? Because C is bought at its rate and sold at its rate at a constant rate. It hasn't accrued anything, it hasn't added any value. So when we look at what value has been added, we understand the rate of exploitation. Rate of exploitation is the same thing as saying what portion of my work went to the capitalist versus what portion of my work came to me. If I worked 1 month every single day for the Lahore University of Management Sciences, hypothetically speaking, out of that, in what time period, in how many days, in 1 month, how many days did it take me to reproduce the salary I got from Lums? And how many days did I work for Lums and they got the labor that I produced and I didn't get it? What portion of my work went to the capitalist versus what portion of my work came back to me? All of that work is mine, but some portion of it is going to the capitalist. So what is the proportion in which that is divided? In other words, do we get it 50-50? Half of my day I work for myself and half of the day I work for the capitalist? Is it 60-40? Is it 40-60? Is it 20-80? What is it? That is what this formula tells us. What is the rate of exploitation? Now, Marx introduces another concept over here, the concept of absolute and relative increase in surplus value. An absolute increase in surplus value occurs when there is more intensive exploitation of labor. In other words, if you make them work harder. In 8 hours, if you make them work harder and they just do more labor, then you can extract more from, because he's just done more labor. But this is a very bad way of increasing your profit actually, because labor productivity has not gone up at all. Labor productivity is the same, you're just making them work harder. You're standing on their head every day and saying, Taimur, did you teach your class today? Did you check your papers? Did you do this? Blah, blah, blah. Did you operate the machine? और करो 2 मिनट सांस नहीं लेने देना, सिगरेट ब्रेक नहीं, वो टॉयलेट ब्रेक करने चला गया, उसके भी तौन पे खड़े हो और इसे को टॉयलेट ब्रेक भी नहीं मिलेगी. Amazon does that, by the way. Amazon will even deduct your pay for taking toilet breaks, etc. They're very strict about working hours in this way. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to increase absolute surplus value. Productivity of labor does not go up. And in fact, this is a very embittering and inefficient method of increasing your profit. It's the least efficient method of increasing your profit, is to make people work harder. What is much better is to increase the productivity of labor. If in 8 hours I was able to make 1 shoe, but now the capitalist says, listen, you are working with your hands and you're a good karigar, but here's a machine. Learn this machine, work on the machine, and in 1 day you're not going to produce 1 shoe, but you'll produce 10 shoes or 100 shoes even. When you have a new machine, your productivity of labor goes through the roof, and you are able to produce with 1 hour of labor much more use values than you were without the machine. The wealth of society increases. The value you are putting into that all those commodities is the same. It's 1 hour of labor. But 1 hour of labor produces much more use values now because the productivity of labor has gone up. This is called a relative increase in surplus value. It means that the relationship between value and use value that you are able to produce with 1 hour of labor has changed dramatically. And this basically reflects an increase in labor productivity thanks to new machinery. And this is what capitalists try to do. What increases productivity enormously is when you bring in new technology. That's how America is so far ahead of you, because they use new technology. When you bring in that new technology, boom, labor expands dramatically. Sadly, most of our management techniques try only, in Pakistan I'm saying, try only to increase absolute surplus value. They never focus on how to increase productivity of labor. That's really not the focus of shop floor management, at least. But that really is what boosts productivity: new machinery, new technology. When you bring new machinery, a change occurs in what we call the organic composition of capital. The organic composition of capital is a proportion of money that you are spending on constant capital versus the proportion of capital that you're spending on buying labor power. It is C divided by V. The more money you spend on buying machines, C rises and V in relation to it contracts and goes down. OCC, in other words, the organic composition of capital, tends to rise over time as productivity of labor increases with the application and purchase of machinery. Today, if you look at a modern automobile factory, look at the way cars are made. What do you find? You find actually that the number of people who are working there is very small. These massive car factories that are producing thousands of cars only have hundreds of workers there. Only hundreds of workers. You would expect that they would have 10,000, 20,000 workers, but no. And how are those cars produced? Have you ever seen those videos? By gigantic robotic arms, fitting the doors together, putting the whole car into paint, and the whole car gets paint in one go. A remarkable technology. And what are the workers doing? They are operating the machinery. So very few number of workers, very little labor power is able to deploy and create massive use values. But what happens as a result? Car factories 100, 200 years ago, or car workshops 150 odd years ago, would have mechanics working literally with their hands to create one car in perhaps a year. Correct? And you would have to have a lot of mechanics working on that car. So V would be very high, and C in fact would be very low. The machinery required to produce it would be almost nothing, hand tools, etc. But today it's the opposite. C is very high. You require really machinery of the most advanced kind to be competitive in the industry. And V becomes very low. Yes, you require skilled labor, but the amount of labor power you have to purchase is now a lot less. So what happens with the organic composition of capital as technology increases? It goes up, it goes up, it goes up. The capitalist would not invest in a machine unless the machine saved labor. The definition of a machine is that it is a labor-saving device. Hence, it would not be a machine if it required more labor to produce the same use values. You understand now? So in that sense, machines will always save labor even when they use individual categories of laborers that are more skilled than the categories of laborers that they used before. And even that relationship is not a necessary one. V, we understand the amount of money that the capitalist is spending to buy labor power is decreasing. And in fact, labor power itself is becoming cheaper. Since productivity of labor keeps rising, the amount of commodities required to purchase labor power keeps falling. The amount of money I require for the sustenance, education, training, etc. of the laborer is now less than it was before. Why? Because the use values that the laborer required in order to complete its cost of production, its value, is now produced more easily. And hence, actually labor power is becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. The amount of labor supplied in a working day remains the same, but the labor required or the products of labor required to purchase labor power is decreasing. Complex relationship. इसका result ये है that S over V keeps on increasing. The rate of exploitation increases as capitalism goes forward. Class inequality therefore also grows because a bigger portion of your labor goes to the capitalist and does not come back to the working people. In other words, let me put it to you in a simpler way, okay? You work 8 hours a day. When productivity of labor was low, it took you 4 hours to produce the values that were necessary for your sustenance, education, training, etc., etc. And then for extra 4 hours you worked for the capitalist. But as productivity of labor has expanded, the amount of time it takes you to produce what would sustain you has decreased. Now in 1 hour of work, you can produce the use values necessary for you to be able to sustain yourself. Let's just say you're an unskilled laborer. Let's start with that. Let's forget about education, training and other things. Let's say you're an unskilled laborer. You work 8 hours a day. In 8 hours a day, 4 hours, in 4 hours, after 4 hours, you are able to produce enough food to feed yourself. And the rest of the 4 hours, the food you produce goes to the capitalist. Now, as productivity of labor expands, it improves, constant capital goes up, OCC goes up. Let's assume you're still at the same level of your skill, etc., that we are holding constant. Now, in 1 hour of labor, I am able to produce, or in 2 hours of labor, I can produce my sustenance. And now 6 hours of my labor will go to the capitalist. So rate of exploitation, in fact, keeps going up as the organic composition of capital also goes up. All businesses in a capitalist society have different organic compositions of capital. There are some people who have businesses that work with very advanced machinery, and there are some people who are doing their work in the old way with their hands or with primitive machinery. That's a given. The market, though, will normalize profits across all these industries that have different organic compositions of capital. In fact, it was Ricardo who first examined this particular problem. What will happen in the context of different organic compositions of capital? It's Marx who solves it. So the market will nonetheless say that regardless of how you produce and regardless of how he produces, what is the market going to equalize? The rate of profit. Hence, the market price of a given commodity will be the cost price plus the average profit. Let's say the average profit is 20%. Let's say your cost price is 100 rupees or 1,000 rupees. Then your price is going to be 120 rupees or 1,200 rupees, etc. Correct? This implies that at the macroeconomic level, prices do in fact deviate from the value of the commodity owing to the organic composition of capital. What? Really? How does this happen? Let's look at it. Industries that have a higher organic composition of capital, in other words, those industries that are efficient, highly efficient firms, will face market prices above the value embodied in their commodity. Because they are more efficient, the value that they are putting into the commodity is actually less than the value they get when they sell that commodity, i.e. the price. Industries, on the other hand, that have a lower organic composition of capital, in other words, that are inefficient, will face market prices below the value embodied in their commodity. They are putting more value into the commodity, but they are not getting that same price as the value in that commodity. Hence, the mechanism of the equalization of the rate of profit rewards the efficient producer and punishes the inefficient producer. The efficient producer the commodity embodies slightly less labor than they get from the market. And for the inefficient producer, it's the opposite. The commodity embodies slightly more labor than they get from the market. The pluses on the one side, that is on the efficient side, balance the minuses on the other side, the inefficient producers. So if you have different industries, and some industries have a high organic composition of capital, and other branch of industry has a low organic composition of capital, what you get is a situation where the industry that is efficient is giving less labor and is getting a better price. And on the other side is embodying more labor and getting not such a good price for its commodity because it's inefficient. Here is an easy way to understand this relationship. Do you remember just when I gave you the example of two producers? Let's go back to just two producers. Assume that a shoe takes 8 hours of socially necessary labor time to produce. Producer A makes it in 6 hours. Producer B makes it in 10 hours. And they go and they sell their shoes. Now the average is 8 hours. I am the efficient producer. You are inefficient. Okay? Producer A will get a price above the actual labor because I will do 6 hours of labor and I will get back 8 hours of labor. Producer B will get a price below the actual labor they used. They used 10 hours of labor and they will get only 8 hours of labor back. So you get the picture that if we're just two producers and we're making shoes, and I make them in less time and you make them in more time, then when we average out the time and look at the socially necessary labor time, I gain 2 hours. You lose 2 hours. That's how it works. Okay? Now take that same idea and put it across the industries. The same thing is happening across industries, across the entire economy in a certain sense. Assume there are now industries producing different things. Assume industry A make their product at the SNLT of that product, but the SNLT of the industry A is more productive than the overall degree of labor productivity. He's making it at the SNLT. He's making shoes at the SNLT. But the whole shoemaking industry has a higher organic composition of capital than shirt making industry. What happens then? Assume industry B make their product, let's say it's shirts, at the SNLT of shirts. But the SNLT of making shirts is less productive than the overall degree of labor productivity. So what is going to happen is that the prices will now go skew a little bit out away from the SNLT of shoes and the SNLT of shirts. The efficient producer will be rewarded. The price that the efficient producer gets will be slightly above the value of the commodity, the SNLT of producing shoes. And the price that the shirt guy will get will be slightly below the SNLT of the shirts. They are both at the SNLT of their products. But the organic composition of capital in shoes versus shirts is different. And for that reason, the price now skews slightly away from the SNLT of those products. But overall what happens, just as the producer who produces below the SNLT is rewarded by a price above the labor they expended, in the same way, owing to the fact that the SNLT of industry A is below the average degree of labor required in society as a whole, that is, it is efficient, it faces a price that is above the SNLT of that industry. The actual price is above the socially necessary labor time of the industry that has a high organic composition of capital. But the opposite thing takes place on the other pole. The SNLT of that industry is below overall labor productivity across all branches of industries. That's why this happens. Just as the producer who produces below the SNLT is rewarded in the context of a single commodity, the industry that produces below the average labor productivity of society as a whole is rewarded in the context of industry as a whole. So actually, when you look at the macroeconomy, not everything sells at its SNLT. Things sell above or below their SNLT depending on the organic composition of capital. Why does this happen? Because the prices are set via demand and supply and the normalization of the rate of profit. So the pluses on one side, that is on the efficient side, balance the minus on the other side, that is the inefficient side. Hence, the total value of commodities equals the total prices of products. The total surplus value equals the total profit. But there is a redistribution now of surplus value. surplus value produced in industries with low organic composition of capital, that is inefficient, is redistributed to industries with a high organic composition of capital, that is efficient, through the price system. Surplus resources actually move from there to here. These people are rewarded, those people are not rewarded. And that's why in capitalism it pays to have high technology, good technology. You will be rewarded for it under capitalism. Complicated? Because in Capital Volume 1, you learned that all products sell for their SNLT. But in Capital Volume 3 now you learn that actually that's not the case. In Capital Volume 1, he kept it simple for you deliberately so that you would understand what SNLT is, how prices are determined. Now when you look at the whole scenario from the macroeconomy, he explains that at the macroeconomic level, the organic composition of capital will skew things in favor of the industries that are technologically advanced and efficient. Okay? It's quite a brilliant piece of understanding of how capitalism actually really functions. Now Marx writes that as the general productivity of labor rises, that is the organic composition of capital overall is going up, the rate of profit actually goes down. What? How is this possible? Let's remember what the rate of profit is. It is S divided by C plus V. As productivity of labor increases, V is going to keep dropping in value. Do you remember I told you that it takes less labor now to produce labor power. So V की value drop होती चली जाएगी. And OCC is rising. A great portion of capital is allocated now to the means of production. But we know that C does not create S. It only transfers. What creates S is in fact V. We can write this in a formula. We can in fact say that S is a function of V. S comes out of V. We can write this in this way, S is a function F of V, or we can write it in this way, S is a function, just a symbol for function E of V. Hence, S becomes smaller as V becomes smaller. Because S is a function of V, if V is contracting overall in terms of the money that is being spent on the purchase of labor power. If I only have 100 laborers now doing the work that in a previous century had to be done by 1,000 laborers, V is contracting, C is expanding, and since S is produced only from V, not from C, what happens is that advancing organic composition of capital will result in a situation where S over C plus V will decline over time. Why? Because S is a product, a function of V. In this equation, the V is going down, it is going down, it is going down. The C is going up. So if the C is going up and the V is going down, if C was 50% and V was 50%, and if 50% V created, let's say, a certain amount of surplus value in accordance with the formula, S is some function of V. Now V has gone down to only 10%. And since S is a function of V, and since V has declined to 10% of the overall capital, as a portion of capital, in proportionate terms, the overall rate of profit will decline as capitalism continues to advance. This can be offset though by 6 reasons. There are 6 countervailing or counteracting forces. The first is the more intense exploitation of labor power. In other words, increasing absolute surplus value will counteract the falling rate of profit. Reduction of wages below the value of labor power will also achieve the same result. Cheapening the elements of constant capital will also achieve the same result. The growth of relative surplus population, the increase of unemployment, etc., will also have the same effect. In other words, in all these instances, I am actually not trading equivalents anymore. Circumstances have arisen that have allowed me to get more for giving less money or giving less value, etc. Foreign trade can also change the situation, reducing the cost of industrial inputs and consumer goods. And finally, the increase in the use of share capital by joint stock companies, which devolves part of the costs of using capital in production on others, can also again countervail the falling rate of profit. So there are factors that can work in the opposite direction. But if you look at the situation over 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, what will tend to happen is that the rate of profit will decline. You say, oh my God, this is so weird. Why would the rate of profit decline? But hang on a second. Here's another twist in the story. The rate of profit is declining, but overall profit will increase. Oh my God, just when I thought I had it figured out, here Marx has thrown another spanner in the works. Total profits are the rate of profit into total capital deployed. Since total capital deployed is going up by leaps and bounds, M is going to M prime is going to M prime 2, M prime 2 is going to M prime 3, etc. Therefore, since total capital deployed is increasing, the absolute amount of profit is going up, but the rate of profit is declining. The absolute profit rises even as the rate declines. So on every dollar that I invest, I am making less money. But since I'm investing more and more dollars, I was investing only $10 before, but now I'm investing $1 million. On $1 million, if I earn 2% profit, I made more money than I would even if I made 100% profit on $10. So in that way, rate of profit goes down, total profit, absolute profit goes up. That's how capitalism works. Finally, what does this all mean? Well, firstly, Ernest Mandel talks about the law of disproportionality. Marx calls it the crisis of overproduction. What is this? The whole system functions in such a way that it's always averaging out everywhere and in an unplanned, chaotic manner. Demand and supply are going up and down. Organic composition of capital is moving prices away from SNLT. SNLT has to be figured out, blah, 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 through the mechanism of the market. Average rate of profit is going up and down. Things are coming in, raw materials and tools, etc. Things are being sold. At any point, wherever there is any spanner in the works for any reason, some supply gets interrupted, something gets overproduced, there isn't enough demand in the economy, aggregate demand in the economy to buy up that thing. Any one of these things can throw the economy into a crisis. The crisis is a crisis of overproduction, which we see every 5 to 7 years. This economics refers to as the business cycle. Okay, the business cycle, it occurs every 5 to 7 years. There's also smaller fluctuations, but the major fluctuations are 5 to 7 years, there's going to be a depression. And Marx observed that this is because of the anarchic way in which production takes place and the organic composition of capital moves forward, supply, demand, all of these factors, averaging out of all of these things, it creates a sort of momentum in the economy that it grows, but it grows in fits and bursts, goes forward and goes backward. These movements or motions of the economy are part of the capitalist system. They cannot be undone. The other aspect is the law of concentration of capital. As capital moves forward, the efficient producer is going to be rewarded. The efficient producer is going to be able to buy out and destroy, through competition, the inefficient producer. As the efficient producer buys out the inefficient producer, the capital gets concentrated and more concentrated. You could put it this way, it comes into less and less, fewer and fewer hands. The amount of capital is increasing, but the concentration of capital in terms of society as a whole is also increasing. So you might have more capital than you did yesterday, but as a proportion of the overall capital, if you are a small capitalist, as a proportion of the overall capital in society, your proportion is actually shrinking. And this creates a conflict not only between the big and the small capitalist, but more importantly, it creates class polarization and class inequality. Now, since the time of Marx, we've had capitalism at a global level. And the result is, as Oxfam tells us, and Oxfam is no Marxist idara, Oxfam tells us that people have so much money that half the population of the world does not have that kind of money. 1% of the population has, most of the wealth and capital of the world. It's ridiculous, the concentration of wealth and power at one pole now. This is obviously the result of capitalism. All of that gets focused also in some parts of the world. New York, London, Paris, Tokyo, and the rest of the world is producing for those centers of capital. And last, we will experience the rising organic composition of capital, new and new technology, yes. We will see also the increasing rate of exploitation. A bigger portion of your work is going to the capitalist, a smaller portion is coming to you. And you will also see at the same time rising absolute profit, that is, overall profit is going up and up and up. Rate of profit is going down and down and down. Rate of exploitation is going up and up and up. The proportion of money that workers are getting is going proportionately down and down and down. Class polarization is increasing. This is not because of any conspiracy. It is the inevitable result of the inexorable laws of capitalist development. It's how the economy functions. This leads to intensified class inequalities in every society and also at the global level. And that's why you see class conflict grow and develop as capitalism grows and develops. So the crisis of capitalism inevitably and inexorably produce the struggle for socialism. It emerges as a consequence of the economic laws of capitalist production.